Okay, stop what you're doing and pay attention, because what I'm about to tell you isn't speculation, it isn't conspiracy theory. This is documented, verified, sanctioned by the Treasury fact about how one of America's most dangerous adversaries has been moving billions of dollars right under our noses. And not just moving it, weaponizing it against us, against our allies, against stability itself. Subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that notification bell, because by the time I'm done walking you through this, you're going to understand something that most people in Washington still refuse to say out loud. We've been watching Iran build a financial empire specifically designed to kill Americans and destabilize the Middle East, and we've done almost nothing to stop it. Let me start with a number: $9 billion. That's how much Iranian shadow banking activity moved through the global financial system in 2024 alone, according to FinCEN's own analysis. $9 billion in a single year. And that's just what they caught, just what American financial institutions flagged as suspicious and reported to the government. The real number? Nobody knows. But it's bigger, much bigger. Here's what we know happened, and I need you to understand the timeline here because the details matter enormously. In June 2025, the U.S. Treasury Department sanctioned over 35 individuals and entities tied to 3 Iranian brothers. Their names are Mansour, Nasser, and Fazlollah Zaring-Halam. You've never heard of them, most people haven't. But these 3 men have built what Treasury officials describe as one of the most sophisticated money laundering operations in modern history. Through a network of exchange houses in Iran and front companies scattered across Hong Kong and other jurisdictions, the Zaring-Halam brothers have laundered billions, not millions, billions of dollars through the international financial system. And here's the part that should terrify you. They did it on behalf of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, the same organization that funds Hezbollah, that arms Hamas, that supplies the Houthis with missiles they fire at ships in the Red Sea, that builds the drones Russia uses to kill Ukrainians. Let me explain how this works, because once you see the mechanism, you'll understand why it's so difficult to stop. Iran sells oil, a lot of oil, despite sanctions, despite international pressure, despite the fact that they're explicitly prohibited from accessing global banking systems. How? Through what's called a shadow fleet. According to tanker trackers, approximately 1,500 oil tankers worldwide were involved in shadow fleet activity last year. 40% of them, 600 ships, were linked to Iranian oil shipments. These aren't Iranian-flagged vessels. They're registered in Panama, in Liberia, in Marshall Islands. Shell companies own them. The ownership is deliberately opaque, layered through jurisdictions that don't ask questions. The ships turn off their GPS transponders. They conduct ship-to-ship transfers in international waters. They falsify cargo manifests. Iranian oil becomes Malaysian blend, or gets relabeled as coming from Iraq or Oman. Then it gets sold, mostly to China. According to commodity intelligence firm Kepler, Iran delivered an average of 1.38 million barrels per day of crude oil to China in 2025. At current prices, that's roughly $50 billion annually. $50 billion flowing to a regime that chants death to America in its parliament and supplies weapons to terrorist organizations across the Middle East. But here's the problem. How do you get paid for that oil when your banks are cut off from SWIFT? When no legitimate financial institution will touch Iranian money? When U.S. sanctions make it illegal for anyone to process those transactions? You build a shadow banking network. And that's exactly what the Zaring-Halam brothers did. They operate exchange houses in Iran. These aren't regular banks. They don't have websites. They don't advertise. They exist in the shadows of the Iranian economy, moving currency for people who can't use traditional banking. According to Treasury estimates, Mansour Zaring-Halam alone annually managed billions of dollars worth of currency transactions related to the sale of Persian Gulf Petrochemical Company products. Billions from one exchange house. But the brilliance, and I use that word advisedly because this is evil brilliance, the brilliance is in how they moved that money internationally. They created front companies, dozens of them, in Hong Kong, in other offshore jurisdictions. Companies with names like Hero Companion Limited, Pluscom Limited, Kinlear Trading Limited, registered addresses, bank accounts, the appearance of legitimacy. Here's a specific example because I want you to see how this actually works. In February 2025, Hero Companion Limited facilitated the National Iranian Oil Company's receipt of approximately $20 million in payments from petroleum products sold to a sanctioned entity called Petroquimico FZE. $20 million in one transaction, through a Hong Kong shell company that exists only on paper. The money comes from oil sales in China. It gets wired to a front company in Hong Kong or other offshore locations. That company then transfers funds to an Iranian exchange house, which converts it to rials or other currencies and distributes it to the Iranian government, the IRGC, whoever needs it. The paper trail is deliberately convoluted. Multiple jurisdictions, multiple currencies, multiple layers of corporate shells. By the time you try to trace the money, it's been laundered through so many entities that proving the connection becomes nearly impossible. Now here's where this gets more sophisticated and more dangerous. They've moved into cryptocurrency. In September 2025, Treasury sanctioned two Iranian nationals, Ali Reza Darakhshan and Arash Estaki Alavand. Between 2023 and 2025, these two men coordinated the purchase of over $100 million worth of cryptocurrency related to Iranian oil sales. They use front companies to convert oil revenues into digital assets, stablecoins mostly, USDT on the Tron blockchain. Why cryptocurrency? 3 reasons. First, it's fast. Wire transfers take days and leave paper trails. Crypto moves in minutes. Second, it's relatively anonymous. Not completely. Blockchain analysis can track it, but it's harder than traditional banking. Third, it bypasses the entire Western financial system. You don't need SWIFT. You don't need correspondent banks. You just need an internet connection and a digital wallet. According to blockchain forensics firm Chainalysis, wallet addresses associated with Darakhshan received $442 million. Alavand's addresses received $300 million, mostly in Tether, the stablecoin pegged to the dollar. That's $750 million moved through cryptocurrency wallets controlled by 2 men working for the Iranian regime. But it gets worse. Because this isn't just about evading sanctions. It's about what they do with the money. The IRGC's Quds Force uses these funds to support terrorist proxy groups. Treasury documents show that Alavand conducted cryptocurrency transfers on behalf of the Al-Qatirji company, which facilitates Iranian oil sales to Syria. He also executed transactions worth millions of dollars with Tawfiq Mohammed Saeed Allah, a Hezbollah-associated money changer who provided Hezbollah access to digital wallets to receive funds from IRGC commodity sales. Let me translate that. Iranian oil money laundered through shell companies and cryptocurrency flowing directly to Hezbollah. The same Hezbollah that killed 241 American servicemen in Beirut in 1983. The same Hezbollah that has approximately 150,000 rockets pointed at Israel right now. Iran's Ministry of Defense and Armed Forces Logistics uses this network to procure weapons components, dual-use technology, materials for ballistic missiles, and drones. In February 2025, Treasury sanctioned 6 Chinese and Hong Kong entities for serving as front companies to procure UAV components for previously sanctioned Iranian firms. Here's what that means in practice. Iran sells oil through shadow tankers to China, gets paid through Hong Kong shell companies, converts some of those proceeds to cryptocurrency, uses that crypto to buy drone parts from Chinese manufacturers, ships those components back to Iran, assembles them into military-grade UAVs, then supplies those drones to Russia, which uses them to strike Ukrainian cities, or to the Houthis, who fire them at ships in the Red Sea. The money flow is circular and self-reinforcing. Oil sales fund weapon purchases. Weapons sustain proxy conflicts. Proxy conflicts create leverage that protects the oil sales. And the whole system operates just outside the reach of Western enforcement. Now let me tell you what just happened that changes everything. On January 30th, 2026, Treasury sanctioned 2 UK-registered cryptocurrency exchanges, ZSEX Exchange Limited and ZXion Exchange Limited. This is the first time OFAC has ever designated digital asset exchanges specifically for operating in Iran's financial sector and processing transactions for the IRGC. According to Treasury's analysis, ZSEX has processed over $94 billion in transactions since its registration in 2022. $94 billion through a cryptocurrency exchange registered in the UK, but operating on behalf of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard? And here's the kicker. Both exchanges are tied to Babak Morteza Zanjani. Remember that name. Zanjani was a billionaire oil trader who helped Iran evade sanctions during the 2010s. He got so good at it that he embezzled $2.7 billion from Iran's own government. They arrested him in 2013, convicted him of fraud, and sentenced him to death in 2016. But in 2024, his sentence was commuted. And by April 2025, he'd reemerged as a financial backer of major projects supporting the IRGC and the Iranian government. So let me get this straight. Iran sentenced a man to death for stealing billions from their oil ministry. Then they let him out of prison. Then he immediately went back to work laundering money for the regime through cryptocurrency exchanges. And he did it for years before we sanctioned him. That tells you something about how valuable these networks are, about how essential this shadow banking system has become to Iran's survival. They need this money more than they need justice for embezzlement. They need it more than they need to maintain any pretense of legitimate governance. Here's the scale we're talking about. Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network analyzed Bank Secrecy Act filings from 2024, suspicious activity reports filed by U.S. financial institutions. They restricted the data set to transactions valued at least $500,000. They eliminated anything they couldn't corroborate as linked to Iran. What was left? 2,027 transactions totaling $9 billion in shadow banking activity. And that's just 2024. Just what touched the U.S. financial system, just what got flagged. Industry estimates suggest Iran earned $50 billion from oil sales in both 2022 and 2023. If even 20% of that revenue flows through these shadow banking networks, and given that Iran's banks are cut off from SWIFT, it's probably more, we're talking about $10 billion annually being wandered through this system every year for years. Now you might ask, why can't we stop this? We know about the Zaring-Hallam brothers, we've sanctioned them. We know about the front companies in Hong Kong and Dubai, we've sanctioned those too. We've identified hundreds of crypto wallet addresses linked to the IRGC. Tether has frozen dozens of Iranian-linked addresses. In July 2025, Tether froze 42 addresses, disrupting what Treasury called entrenched evasion networks. So why does it keep working? 3 reasons. First, jurisdictional complexity. These networks span multiple countries: Hong Kong, China, Turkey, Malaysia, Singapore. Each jurisdiction has its own regulations, its own enforcement priorities, its own willingness or unwillingness to cooperate with U.S. sanctions. According to FinCEN's analysis, foreign shell companies play the largest role in Iranian shadow banking activities. Iran heavily relies on companies registered in Hong Kong and other offshore jurisdictions because they're easy to establish and subject to less oversight. You can create a shell company in Hong Kong in a matter of hours, give it a legitimate sounding name, open a bank account, and suddenly you have a vehicle for moving millions of dollars that looks, on paper, like normal business activity. Second reason, the speed of adaptation. Every time Treasury sanctions one network, Iran builds another. When we targeted the Zaring-Hallam brothers in June 2025, their operations didn't stop. The money just flowed through different entities, different exchange houses, different front companies. It's like playing whack-a-mole with an opponent who can spawn new moles faster than you can hit them. The cryptocurrency component makes this even worse because crypto infrastructure is permissionless. You don't need anyone's approval to create a new wallet. When Tether froze 42 Iranian addresses, users just moved to alternative platforms, Polygon, other blockchains, other stablecoins. The money keeps flowing. Third reason, and this is the one nobody wants to talk about, China. China is Iran's sole buyer of crude oil. According to Kepler data, China purchased 1.38 million barrels per day from Iran in 2025. But China also buys Iranian petroleum products, fuel oil, naphtha, liquefied petroleum gas. And here's the thing, China knows this oil is sanctioned. They know these transactions violate U.S. law. They buy it anyway. And it's not just China. Other countries in the region continue to engage in trade that undermines sanctions enforcement because it's profitable, because enforcement is weak, because they calculate correctly that we won't actually do anything meaningful about it. This is what people don't understand about sanctions. They only work if everyone enforces them. If major economies continue trading with the sanctioned country, the sanctions become theater, symbolic gestures that make us feel like we're doing something while the money keeps flowing. Iran's not stupid. They've studied sanctions for decades. They've been under some form of U.S. sanctions since 1979. 46 years. They've gotten very, very good at this. Now let me tell you what this means for you, for America, for global security. First, Iran's nuclear program. Every dollar they launder is a dollar they can spend on uranium enrichment, on centrifuges, on ballistic missile development. In February 2025, the Trump administration issued National Security Presidential Memorandum 2, reinstating the, quote, maximum pressure campaign. The goal? Deny Iran all paths to a nuclear weapon. But you can't deny them the resources to build nuclear weapons if they're generating $50 billion annually from oil sales and successfully laundering enough of that money to fund their programs. Second, regional terrorism. This shadow banking network doesn't just fund Iran's government, it funds Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, Iraqi militias, Syrian regime forces. Every rocket Hezbollah fires at Israel, every drone the Houthis launch at commercial shipping, every IED that kills American soldiers in Iraq, that's all paid for directly or indirectly with money flowing through this system. Third, and this is what should concern everyone, it proves that the international financial system can be circumvented. If Iran can move $9 billion through shadow banking networks in a single year, despite being one of the most heavily sanctioned countries on earth, what does that tell you about the effectiveness of sanctions generally? What does it tell you about our ability to enforce international law when determined actors decide to ignore it? Russia is watching this, North Korea is watching this, Venezuela is watching this. They're seeing that if you build sophisticated enough networks, if you exploit jurisdictional gaps, if you leverage cryptocurrency and shell companies and corruption in the right places, you can largely ignore Western sanctions. That's not just Iran's lesson, that's a lesson every adversary is learning right now. Let me give you one more data point that illustrates how deep this goes. FinCEN's advisory highlighted that some Iranian shadow banking networks have unwittingly processed payments through Western financial technology companies. Media reports indicated that two companies, Paysera and Wise, legitimate fintech platforms used by millions of people, had unknowingly facilitated Iranian sanctions evasion. Think about that. Iranian operatives were able to route sanctioned money through mainstream financial technology platforms. Platforms that have compliance departments, that run anti-money laundering checks, that are supposed to prevent exactly this kind of activity. And they got through anyway because the networks are that sophisticated, because the deception is that good. So what's being done about it? In June 2025, FinCEN issued an updated advisory to help U.S. financial institutions identify and report suspicious activity connected with Iranian illicit finance. They provided red flags. Watch for trade-based money laundering, where Iran uses fake invoices and phony contracts to move value. Watch for Iranian oil being relabeled as coming from other countries. Watch for complex multi-jurisdictional transactions involving exchange houses and front companies in Hong Kong and other offshore locations. Watch for cryptocurrency transactions involving Iranian exchanges like Novatex or patterns consistent with oil for crypto schemes. Treasury has sanctioned dozens of entities in 2025 alone. January, February, March, April, June, July, September. Sanctions every single month, targeting Iranian shadow banking networks, oil traders, front companies, exchange houses, cryptocurrency facilitators. They're trying. The designation activity shows they're trying. But here's the problem. Sanctions are reactive. Iran builds a network, we discover it, we sanction it. 6 months later, a year later. By the time we sanction them, they've already moved billions of dollars and they're already building the next network. What we need is something different. We need real enforcement mechanisms that impose actual costs on the countries enabling this. China, Turkey, Hong Kong. We need secondary sanctions that are painful enough that these jurisdictions decide Iranian oil money isn't worth losing access to Western financial systems. We need cryptocurrency regulation that closes these gaps. Right now, you can create an exchange, register it in the UK, process $94 billion in transactions tied to a designated terrorist organization, and operate for years before anyone shuts you down. That's insane. That shouldn't be possible. We need intelligence capabilities that can penetrate these networks faster, identify the players earlier, disrupt the operations before billions of dollars flow through them. We have the technical capability to do this. Blockchain analysis can track these transactions. But analysis isn't enough if we don't act on it quickly. Here's what I think is actually happening, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm too cynical, but I think the political will to truly confront this doesn't exist, because truly confronting it would require confronting China. It would require difficult conversations with regional partners. It would require telling countries that they need to choose. Either you stop enabling Iranian sanctions evasion, or you lose access to our markets. That's a conversation nobody in Washington wants to have, because the economic implications are massive. So instead, we sanction a few exchange houses, we freeze some crypto wallets, we issue advisories, we pat ourselves on the back for being tough on Iran, and $50 billion keeps flowing to Tehran every year, and the IRGC keeps funding Hezbollah, and the nuclear program keeps advancing, and Americans keep dying in the Middle East at the hands of Iranian-backed militias. That's the reality. That's what's actually happening while we pretend sanctions are working. Now, there's a counter-argument, and I want to be fair here. Some analysts argue that these sanctions are having an effect. Iran's economy is in terrible shape. Inflation is running at 40 to 50%. The rial has lost 90% of its value since 2018. Ordinary Iranians are suffering. So in that sense, the pressure is working. But that's not the same thing as stopping the money flows that fund terrorism and nuclear development. The Iranian regime has made a calculation. They'll let their population suffer if it means they can maintain their regional power projection and their path to nuclear weapons. That's the choice they've made. And as long as they can generate $50 billion from oil sales and launder enough of it to fund their priorities, they'll keep making that choice. So what happens next? Here's my prediction. And again, I could be wrong. But based on the pattern we've seen, here's what I think happens. Treasury will continue sanctioning entities monthly. We'll see more designations, more front companies shut down, more crypto addresses blocked. But the fundamental architecture of Iran's shadow banking system will remain intact because it's distributed across too many jurisdictions with too many actors to completely dismantle. Iran will continue adapting. They'll move more heavily into cryptocurrency as enforcement on traditional banking tightens. They'll explore central bank digital currencies. They'll strengthen ties with Russia, China, and other sanctioned or adversarial states to build alternative financial rails that don't touch the Western system at all. And unless something changes dramatically, unless we get serious about secondary sanctions on the countries enabling this, unless we develop real enforcement mechanisms with teeth, this will continue. 10 years from now, we'll still be talking about Iranian shadow banking. We'll still be sanctioning exchange houses and front companies, and Iran will still be moving billions. The question is, are we okay with that? Because right now, through our inaction, through our unwillingness to confront the hard diplomatic and economic realities required to truly cut off these money flows, we're implicitly accepting it. Here's what you need to do. Subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell, because this story isn't going away. Every time Treasury sanctions a new network, I'm going to break it down for you. Every time new intelligence emerges about how Iran is adapting, you'll hear it here first. Share this video. Send it to someone who needs to understand what's actually happening behind the headlines. This isn't about politics. This isn't Republican or Democrat. This is about whether we're serious about confronting Iranian terrorism and nuclear proliferation, or whether we're just pretending while the money keeps flowing. Leave a comment, Tell me if you think I'm missing something. Tell me if you think sanctions can work. Tell me what you think should be done differently. Because this is a conversation we need to be having openly, honestly, without the usual Washington doublespeak. The shadow banking network is real. The Zaring Hallam brothers are real. The $9 billion in laundered money is real. The cryptocurrency flows funding Hezbollah and the Houthis are real. The 600 ships in Iran's shadow fleet are real. This isn't speculation. This is documented, Treasury-confirmed reality. And right now, today, while you're watching this video, money is flowing. Oil is being sold. Ships are transferring cargo in international waters. Shell companies are processing wire transfers in Hong Kong and other offshore locations. Cryptocurrency is being converted in Tehran. And that money is being used to build missiles, fund terrorists, and advance a nuclear program that threatens the entire Middle East. That's not happening in some hypothetical future. That's happening now. And until we develop the political will to truly confront it, it's going to keep happening. I'll see you in the next one. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and never assume that just because something is sanctioned, it's actually stopped.